The NDIS is being targeted by organised crime gangs,
stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Labor is calling for a crackdown after claims of rampant fraud.
It follows the biggest rip-off we have ever seen involving the National Disability Scheme.
The figures are shocking. Almost $1.5 billion ripped off the NDIS annually. That's 5% of the $29 billion a year scheme stolen.
The same people in organised crime who were taking money out of the family daycare scheme are now moving across into NDIS, obtaining people's personal information, false invoices, overpadding of bills, ghost payments.
Go. 4 people with alleged links to gangs have been charged with defrauding the NDIS to the tune of $2 million. A disability worker has faced court accused of making 569 false claims worth $314,000.
And I think there's very few things more despicable in life than crooks taking money which is due to go to disabled people.
While the new minister promises a crackdown, the rorts are just the tip of the iceberg. Disability advocates highlighting the long-standing issues for legitimate participants.
The NDIS is so high stakes. If you get support under the NDIS, that's terrific. But for so many other people with disability, remembering that around 4 million of Australians do have disability, if they haven't got a plan, there's really very little support for them in the community.
It actually costs more every year than it costs to run Medicare, and those costs will continue to increase.
While the previous government did fully fund the NDIS, many participants had their plans cut back. Some took their plight to a tribunal, where the agency responsible spent another $41 million to fight them.
The trust has been broken. The biggest challenge in the next year is how do we actually make sure that those thousands of cases are at the Administrative Appeals Tribunal where people are fighting, often over not much money, to keep the supports they need.
Last week, NDIS Chief Martin Hoffman announced he would step down. Advocates now hopeful this is the moment for a major reset.
Well, Graeme Innes is the former Disability Discrimination Commissioner and he joins us now. Graeme, can you help us understand how these scams are working?
Well, the fact is that any scheme like this, whether it's Medicare, National Disability Insurance Scheme, criminal element are going to look for vulnerabilities. And the issue that we have with the NDIS is that the aim of the NDIS is to give people with disabilities far more choice and control in our lives. Now, when you do that, you open up opportunities for people to establish businesses and to develop ways to take advantage of people with disabilities, some of whom, maybe there might be more opportunity to scam. I don't want to go into too much detail and give the bad guys any ideas they haven't already thought of, but you can only address these things to the degree practicable. I mean, if we in the community took all windows out of houses, we could reduce burglaries. Or if we took all cash out of the economy, we could reduce bank and retail robberies and other sorts of fraud. But I'm not sure that the Australian community is ready for those things to happen just yet.
Well, the new government's made a commitment to overhaul the NDIS. What is the one thing that you would change first to make a real difference to participants? When
the NDIS was established, there was lots of other services provided by both state and federal governments, which supported many people with disabilities who are not on the scheme. And because we make the scheme so important in the context of the rest of that group of people, there's huge levels of contestability to get in to the scheme. And that, of course, has an impact on the $41 million that's been spent so far this year, this financial year, fighting against claims to get into the scheme. So I would address that problem and I'd reduce the contestability. I think that's a key thing to do in the scheme.
Graeme, the budget forecasts the NDIS will overtake defence in terms of total budget. Is that sustainable long term?
Well, is defence sustainable long term? I mean, we've just given $900 million to the French and we'll never see those submarines. So you have to ask that question first.
Good point.
But we also need to bear in mind what the NDIS is contributing to the Australian economy. And Per Capita did some excellent research on the money in the scheme spent in each of the 151 electorates in Australia. And when you balance that out against the cost of the scheme in real terms might be high in the federal budget, but it's a lot less in the broader economic functioning of the country. And I think that's the figure that we need to be focusing on.
Graeme Innes, thanks for talking to us tonight.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.